This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
Democratic officials in Iowa are continuing to release official results from Monday's caucus. Senator Bernie Sanders and former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg are now in a virtual tie with 97% of precincts reporting. Sanders maintains a lead in the popular vote, but Buttigieg has a slight advantage in what's known as the state delegate equivalent race. Buttigieg has 26.2% of state delegate equivalents, while Sanders has 26.1%. The New York Times is now predicting Sanders has a greater chance of winning overall, in part of the Vermont senator's overwhelming strength in satellite caucuses in Iowa and around the country.
And world. Democratic officials have attributed the chaos in Iowa to a newly created app built by a little-known firm called Shadow, which has ties to the Democratic establishment as well as the Pete Buttigieg campaign. Democratic leaders in Iowa are also facing widespread criticism over its slow release of results and, in some cases, for issuing incorrect results. In one case, Black Hawk County, delegates for Bernie Sanders were mistakenly given to Deval Patrick. We go now to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where we're joined by Chris Schwartz. He's the chair of the Black Hawk County Board of Supervisors, the state co-chair for Bernie 2020. He's also the state director of Americans for Democratic Action. Chris Schwartz, welcome to Democracy Now! Why don't you this is such a confusing story about what's taking place in Iowa, still so unclear, so much secrecy. Maybe the word shadow is appropriate here. Take us through what has taken place so far in Iowa.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. It's an honor to be here with the Democracy Now! Here today. And so caucus nights, things seem to be going relatively smoothly in my very diverse precinct in Waterloo, which is the most diverse city in the state of Iowa. We were in and out of our caucus site in less than an hour and left feeling, good, like, hey, this thing ran smoothly. We're going to know results tonight. And then the hours just went on and on and on, and didn't have a sense of what was going on, then finding out that the app wasn't working for reporting, and then they didn't have the backup phone lines, operating with enough people, and we were finding out that precinct chairs who were all volunteers who did a pretty good job of running their sites were just waiting on hold for hours and hours and hours, and finally giving up and going to bed. Before the day
of the caucus, Chris? Had you practiced? Had you ever seen this app? Had people tried to put some information in to see if it would register?
No, I had never seen the app. Only people that were precinct chairs running it had access, and it's my understanding that most of them just saw it just the weekend before. Some of them were trying to download the app at the actual caucus site that night, and so there had not been enough of a practice run.
But Chris, it seems extraordinary, given the stakes in this election, that Democrats would take a risk of this sort by trying an app that hadn't even been tested. And you say that only precinct chairs saw it, and that too just the weekend before.
Yeah, it was a pretty remarkable thing, and sometimes you're recruiting precinct chairs up to the last minute to run these caucus sites. So to think that they could be, trained on this new technology, there really should have been some other kind of dry run to see if that was a route that was worthy of going for the Iowa caucuses.
So keep going. So the hours drag out. Yes. The app doesn't work. How do you get the Black Hawk County caucus information to Central Command or whoever it is that's
so the hours
counting
are
this
going
up?
on. It was about 2 o'clock on Tuesday. I'd gotten an email from our county party secretary just letting me know that Sanders won in a big, sizable margin in Black Hawk County, and he knew that I would want to have that information. About an hour later, I went down to our county party office to volunteer and help stuff the envelopes of materials that get sent on to the Iowa Democratic Party in Des Moines, at which point I was shown the breakdown of what the first round of voting and what the final delegate count would be for our county convention, at which point it showed a good almost 1,000 vote lead in that first round for Senator Sanders, something that increased when you went even to the second round of viability. And so this was at about 2 o'clock that day. I knew what was going on, that we had won Black Hawk County really big, but it still wasn't included in that first initial round of 64% of precincts that was released. and I was getting concerned. Nobody in our county party understood why those numbers weren't included.
Because you had reported
And so finally
them.
that evening I reached out to Troy Price, the state chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, and asked, what is the process that this needs to go through to get released, trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, trying to understand what their process was they're going through. And I just heard crickets. I heard nothing back when he's usually been very responsive to me on things. And so finally the next day I reached out again. I said, hey, I'm still waiting on this stuff. And then I just was feeling guilty that I knew the results of our county, but the constituents I represent didn't. The volunteers of all these different campaigns, the volunteers that ran these caucus sites and worked really hard to do it, all the people that came in from across the country to get out the vote. We had 40 people staying at our house that week and doing get out the vote efforts, and these people had a right to know what the results of their work was. And so we tweeted it out. I was actually driving, so my fiance Logan was handling my phone, and I just told him what to tweet out. And we put the results out there on Twitter and Facebook. Apparently just at the same time that the Iowa Democratic Party was releasing another round of results, to find out that they had given all these Bernie Sanders delegates in Black Hawk County to Deval Patrick. Deval Patrick, and it shouldn't even come as a surprise to Deval Patrick himself, didn't have any support in Black Hawk County that evening. And so we're just finding out that as we were putting out these results, they're putting out results that are totally contrary. And I think it forced them to immediately walk back with what they had put out.
So to be clear,
and so I really question that.
it's
taking
Chris,
so long to get these results out, yet they release them, and then they still get it wrong. What is going on? What is the process? Nobody's being told this. I'm a member of the Democratic Party. I'm an elected official in the state. I still can't even get my answers, answered.
So to be clear, Chris, we got this information because you posted it. Black Hawk County caucus results. Sanders, 2,149 votes. That's 155 county delegates. Buttigieg, 1,578 votes. That's 111 county delegates, so that's like a 44 county delegate lead for Sanders. And you'd given it to them early. It's not that they didn't have yours, that you weren't able to get through. When you finally got through, you then saw results after results posted by the Iowa Democratic Party, but Black Hawk County was not included, and then you saw it was counted as the former governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick's votes.
Yeah, at first things were not being included, and then when they finally were included, they had all these precincts going to Deval Patrick, which just didn't make any sense. Like I said, my caucus was done in under an hour, and it took almost 48 hours for the Iowa Democratic Party to finally report those results correctly.
Now, in our lead, we talked about a number of places now predicting that actually Bernie Sanders, it's a virtual tie between him and Buttigieg now, but could pull ahead because of the satellite caucuses. Now, if you could explain, this is such an obscure process that people in this country, I don't think even understand, maybe even in Iowa. Satellite caucuses take place in Iowa, in the United States, and outside around the world for the Iowa caucus?
Yes. So the satellite caucuses were a new thing this year, one of the reforms to try and make the caucuses more accessible, because as most people looking at this, the caucus is, there's a hurdle to accessibility, whether you're disabled or a working person who can't get off work to come out and participate for a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour long process. And so they had first proposed doing a virtual caucus. That was shut down, and so they decided to do these satellite caucuses that were held in union halls. There were some satellite caucuses that were geared for persons with disabilities. There were satellite caucuses that were Spanish language, and it's my understanding that we're waiting on a lot of them that were located in the 1st Congressional District in eastern Iowa, and Bernie Sanders was very strong at all of those. I'm hearing that Pete Buttigieg was not viable at a number of those satellite caucus sites, so I think that it's going to be very interesting to see if that tips the scales here when we get those results. But what is clear to me is that more Iowans came out and supported Bernie Sanders on caucus night. And so if there's such difficulty figuring out the accuracy of the delegates and what the state delegate equivalents are and what that proper equation is, then let's just go with the popular vote. And that just clearly shows that Bernie Sanders had the most amount of support in Iowa on caucus night.
And Chris, could you explain before we conclude, why is it that a new app was introduced in the first place? I mean, were there difficulties or problems with the app that was used during the Iowa caucus in 2016? What was the justification given for the introduction of an app that was not tested?
Yes, it's a very good question. So there was no app used in 2016. I was someone who ran my caucus site as the precinct chair in 2016. And we just phoned in our results. There were enough people answering the phone that night. I got through right away and really had no issues. And so that's why, it was very close that night. And that's, I believe, it went, late into night because it was coming down so close between Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton. But we still knew it within hours of the end of the caucus site because we were using the old standard system of phoning in your results and then dropping off your packet at your county party headquarters, and then that's all sent to Des Moines so that the record is there. And I think just don't understand why, if the app wasn't working, why we didn't have enough people operating those phone systems.
I'm looking at a piece in The Intercept, a person with knowledge of the company's culture, talking about Shadow, the app creator, who asked to remain anonymous for fear of reprisal, shared communications showing top officials at the company regularly expressed hostility to Senator Bernie Sanders supporters. McGowan is married to Michael Halley. Now, McGowan is the head of Acronym, which owns Shadow, and Tara McGowan, is married to Michael Hall, or Halley, H-A-L-L-E, a senior strategist with the Buttigieg campaign. There's no evidence any preference of candidates had any effect on the coding issue that's stalling the Iowa results. But as we wrap up, Chris, if you can talk about the significance of all of this. And, this has certainly opened the discussion again, whether Iowa should be first. You talked about Black Hawk County and Waterloo being the most diverse area of Iowa. But the fact is Iowa and New Hampshire, two of the whitest states in the country, are determining so much of, well, who could be president in 2021.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of information developing about the app that is still unclear. One thing that is clear to me is that the decision wasn't made by the entire state central committee of the Democratic Party, and those are the folks that the party elects to represent us and decide the direction of the state party. I guess it was a decision of a operations subcommittee, and even folks on the state central committee that were questioning the use of this app, whether it was secure, and whether we had the proper backups in place. I'm being told by those state central committee members that those voices were quelled. I do certainly think, there are pluses and minuses of the Iowa caucus. A plus of being in a small state like Iowa is that the community organizing still matters in this versus it just being a big media market game. But if I could wave my magic wand, I would probably just have us do a primary all on the same day as Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. And then you've got a really great cross-section of America. You have rural states, you have more urban areas, you have much more diversity that reflects the melting pot that is America. All in states there where community organizing and mobilization would still matter. And so that would be what I would tell the DNC. Let's move to a primary that's held on those 4 states all on the same day when this is up next.
I think also people would not be aware in the country that Bernie Sanders, now in a virtual tie with Buttigieg, they're 0.1% apart on the delegate equivalence, as you talk about it in Iowa, but thousands of popular votes ahead, right? At this point, 2,500?
Absolutely. So it is very clear that Bernie Sanders had the most support of Iowans on caucus night. And so I think that's what people should be looking at around the country, is that this movement came out here in Iowa. In my own precinct, it was very, very diverse support of young Black and brown and queer and straight people coming together and support Sanders. And that's what our coalition looks like all across this country. And I believe there's a movement that is ready to elect Sanders president, that is going to have really great momentum going off of these early victories in Iowa, and I predict we're going to do very well in New Hampshire on Tuesday.
Chris Schwartz, I want to thank you for being with us, chair of the Black Hawk County Board of Supervisors, the state co-chair for Bernie 2020, as well as state director of Americans for Democratic Action, speaking to us from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We're going to talk about the National Archives. You heard about the changing of the photographs of the 2017 March, Women's March. Well, now there's a new story. What else is being erased? For example, ICE records. Stay with us.